Victoria Boyert. This is my tea shop, Satori Tea Company, in San Jose, California.
Hi, my name is Mark Rozell and I work in retail management for Verve Coffee Roasters in Santa Cruz, California.
My passion for tea began when I was 7 and I took a tea class with my mother on how to serve a proper English afternoon tea, and ever since then I knew that I wanted my life to revolve around tea, to have a tea shop and just live tea.
My passion for coffee actually began as a small child when my mother would let me dip cookies in her coffee, which she took very sweet and creamy, so that was really good. Tea and coffee can be very similar and also very different. Coffee tends to be about perfecting the preparation of that specific coffee, whereas tea can be prepared in various ways and can be steeped more than once and produce different results in the cup.
I definitely think coffee culture in the US is much bigger than a tea culture. I do think tea culture is growing, but we are a minority.
There are far more coffee houses than there are tea houses. It seems that people like to take their time with tea.
You order your cup of tea, you relax, you enjoy yourself. Where when I hear coffee, I think of fast pace, get in and get out.
People often grab to go.
I would say I do know a bit about Chinese tea. I do sell Chinese tea currently. They're wonderful teas. I really do like them, but I don't necessarily feel a strong connection because I don't really know where they're coming from.
What do I know about Chinese tea? I know that what we call black tea should really be called red tea, and black teas are only fermented teas.
We will be spending 2 weeks in China visiting 2 tea regions, Hangzhou for green tea.
And we're going to the Yunnan Province to learn about pu'er tea.
I am ecstatic to go to China.
I'm very excited about this trip. Today was our first day in China, and we started by going to the Longjing Tea Farm near Westlake in Hangzhou.
Hangzhou is the largest city in Zhejiang Province in eastern China. It is estimated about 8.7 million people live in Hangzhou, which is larger than the population of New York City. So in the morning, we kind of drove out of the city and went up these kind of small roads and up into the hills. In the distance, you can kind of see where they're starting to grow. They've grown tea, some really high, then there's trees and bamboo, and it's just so unlike anything I have ever experienced in California.
And immediately stepping out of the car, I was just hit by the smell of the tea in the air. Every breath you take is just so refreshing, full of this rich, sweet smell of tea.
There also was the Dragon Well, which is where the Longjing gets its name from. So Longjing translates to Dragon Well.
It's called Dragon Well because during a period of very intense drought, the well kept flowing. So the people believed that it must somehow be connected to the ocean. And since the dragon lives in the ocean, then they called it Dragon Well. And we climbed our way up a hill and I got to touch my first tea plants ever. The leaves are very soft and very delicate, a lot less waxy than I would have imagined.
Just picked 2 leaves and a bud. I cannot believe I'm here right now. It is beautiful. So this one's the bud, this little one right here, and it has a little bit of a down on there.
I can see that.
And then these are the 2 leaves, and apparently this is the kind of the prized leaf. This is the best plucking for tea.
We looked out across a view that was just breathtaking. You could see the tops of separate hills kind of cascading in front of each other, and it just disappeared into the distance in the fog. And the hills were just, some of them looked straight up, and you could see tiny tea farms on each hill in the craziest spots where you thought nobody could walk there. Way in the distance, you would just see one. We actually got to climb a hill like that with 2 helpers, and we had quite a hard time climbing the hill. It's quite steep. I can't imagine working a whole day on top of a hill like that.
We put on a little hat, and they kind of tied this basket in front of us and just started plucking the tea leaves. So she was showing me that the 2 leaves and a bud, that little tiny bud, that's what you pick. And it's very small, and you get the very fresh leaves, and they're old leaves, and she's telling me, oh no, it's too old, you don't want that leaf, or oh, that's perfect, that's the right one. And so she was just helping me pluck the leaves, which I could not believe I was actually picking tea leaves. I mean, I love tea, I've dedicated my life to tea, and this is the first time that I am in a tea farm picking the leaves that is going to be made into a tea. Not any tea even, just the first tea that I think I learned about back in the States, dragonwell tea.
Picking the tea was amazing. It was my first time ever having that experience, and it was interesting to see how quickly the helpers could locate the correct leaves to pick. You want to pick the top 2 leaves and the bud only. They could see one and pick it right away, whereas I was having a harder time finding just the right one, and you want to do it just right. So I was very careful about it, but it was a lot of fun.
After we plucked the tea, we were actually invited to look and see how it was made into tea. So this man was sitting in front of this big wok, this hot bowl, and he threw our tea that we plucked in that day and just started kind of flattening it against the wall of the pot, and then fluffing it and flattening it, fluffing it, and kind of making the signature dragonwell tea. It's a very flat leaf.
I guess firing it helps to stop the oxidation process immediately. So he would put the tea in the bowl, and it would start crackling immediately, and you could smell this kind of a smokier aroma coming off of it.
And it was gorgeous. I mean, the smell was just so strong and amazing. And it was kind of getting very green, and then it started to kind of wilt a little bit until finally it was getting pretty dry and flat. And it was so exciting to see, because then I got to do it too. And he showed me how to kind of flatten it on the bottom and kind of bring it up the side and air it out and then flatten it again. And it was very hot, that I have to say. I almost burned my hand, but it was really a fascinating experience.
I sat down and put my hand in the bowl, and I was shocked at how hot it was. It's almost like a grill, you know? And he's sitting there putting his hand down and putting his hand down. He even told me I was trying to press the tea down into the bowl the way he did, and he was trying to tell me to press down more, and I couldn't hold my hand there for as long as he could. I thought his hands must be like leather, you know, but afterwards someone else was speaking to him, and I heard him admit that it's even hurts his hands. And thinking back on how difficult it was to climb the hill and pick the tea, and how difficult it is to fire the tea. You know, it's really a labor of love, and it takes a lot of hardship to produce something so wonderful, and I don't think that should go overlooked. When we were through firing the tea, we got to go down into a kitchen and witness a chef prepare 4 dishes using tea, or somehow involving the tea culture in each dish.
The first dish we tried was Prince Ginseng pine nut soup. It was actually served in a little clay teapot, and they put a little dry ice in this beautiful kind of bowl with flowers and this gorgeous vegetable sculptures. They poured hot water, and all of a sudden it just steamed around the teapot, and they poured a little bit in a teacup, and that's actually how you eat the soup. It's almost like a chicken broth.
The second dish was a shrimp dish called Jing shrimp, and it was cooked with the tea leaves. The shrimp itself was unlike any shrimp I've ever had. It was so fantastic.
I love it.
Fantastic.
We then actually tried a free-range chicken that was it's very well known in the area. It's a pretty popular chicken dish in Longjing.
The chicken is cooked for 4 hours in a broth that's made with the dragon well water, and it comes out so tender. It just falls right off the bone. It's fantastic.
So the last dish we tried was dongpo pork, which was kind of just like a cube of pork. Really sweet.
It's so
soft.
It's like a cloud.
Yeah. Marshmallow. It was so flavorful and delicious. Today, my first day in Hangzhou was the first time I've ever seen a tea farm. It was the first time I ever seen a tea plant. I did not even know what it looked like. I had never seen one in person before, and it was a dream come true for me. That's all I can say. It was something I have only dreamt about. I never in my wildest dreams even thought I'd be here today, and I was in heaven. Today was our second day in Hangzhou, which started out really fun and jovial. We went to West Lake.
The lake is so huge and beautiful.
You could see the mountains and kind of got a perspective of where we are. We got to rent some bikes and kind of travel down this path in the middle of the lake.
We rode down, there was a lot of people on the path, a lot of tourists and little miniature tour buses kind of cruising by, and we continued down the path for a long time. Then decided to take a path down next to the water and sit and relax for a while.
The breeze was blowing and it was just such beautiful weather. And I noticed that out in the lake there weren't any motorboats. It was just everyone kind of peacefully rowing, very calm and relaxed, and just people enjoying the day. And it was so much fun.
We looked out, and way across the lake, up on a big hill, we could see the top of this beautiful pagoda with a very tall golden spire on the top of it.
Next, we got to take a boat ride on the lake.
On a tiny little rickety wooden boat with someone in the back with a great big oar going through the water.
Which was amazing. It was such a wonderful experience. Later in the afternoon, we went to Lingyan Temple, which translated means the Temple of Soul's Retreat. We passed all these beautiful sculptures in the side of this kind of mountain.
There were so many carvings of Buddhas in all different forms coming out of the rock, way up high where you wouldn't think anyone would be able to get up there and carve them. They were beautiful.
And they're really old. They found out they're over 800 years old, which is 4 times the age of the United States, which is kind of mind-boggling.
And we walked up and just continued enjoying that, and eventually we reached the entrance to the temple.
And we kind of passed through, and the first kind of experience I felt was the smell of incense. And then you see this kind of cloud of smoke. And all of a sudden I look up and there's a huge building.
We walked inside and we entered the first hall, where I was immediately struck by this massive statue that was gilded in gold, and it was 800 years old.
It was the god that was overlooking and protecting the whole temple. And as you come outside, I see that they're lighting the incense.
And bowing, and then placing it in these massive, almost cauldron type things filled with fire, and smoke was just billowing out of them.
So this whole experience, you're kind of like shrouded in smoke, and the smell is wonderful, and then people just praising their gods and being so thankful. It was truly a rewarding experience.
And we headed up the steps to the next hall, which was massive.
We were able to go inside, and we had the opportunity to pay our respects to the god of Shakomuni.
It's 82 feet tall and completely gilded in gold from top to bottom, and sitting there in just peaceful serenity with bright blue hair painted on the top.
Just the beautiful peacefulness on the Buddha's face was really, really inspiring. His eyes weren't fully open, and just you could really feel him kind of looking upon you and just kind of showing his love and his compassion. And as you come around the corner, I see kind of like a mural, a huge mural of hundreds of gods in these 3 levels. The bottom level is the sea, and the middle is earth, and at the top it's the heavens. And kind of the focal point is Kuan Yin, which is the goddess of mercy.
And she stood there holding a small pot in her hand that poured water down into the ocean. And that water is said to cure all disease. You know, we came to China to learn about Chinese tea culture, but today we got to go to this temple and learn about an entirely different part of Chinese culture.
Not only do these people make tea and they have exports and we kind of know them from the outside, but this is a kind of a really wonderful glimpse of their culture from within.
It's day 3 on our trip in China, and today I had a great time visiting the Meija Wu Tea Farm.
We kind of came up this road, and the village was surrounded by these big mountains, these green mountains cascading with tea farms. It was in this little valley, and we were greeted by one of the village leaders, and he took us up into some of the tea farms.
And he was very nice and a very informative man. He told us many things about the tea and about the farm. The farm is divided into separate plots by these vertical lines coming down the hillside. Each family takes care of a plot of about the size of 2 acres. The annual output per acre of tea on this farm is about 15 kilos or 30 to 35 pounds of tea.
Over here we have a tea plant that's over 100 years old that they have used from one mother plant, and they use the clippings and plant several tea plants over the years. This tea is much higher quality and a higher grade, which means it's a bit more expensive. Then over here we learned that these plants are about only 60 years old, still great quality, but not quite as prized and highly regarded. So even though these tea plants here are over 100 years old, they keep them very short to maintain the quality. Other tea farms, they have plucking in the spring, which is usually kind of higher quality and more expensive, and then they'll pluck in the summer and sometimes even early fall. But in Meija Wu, to maintain quality, they only pluck in the spring.
He also told us that the plants are only watered by rainfall. And so I asked him if there's ever been times when there has been rough weather or drought that may have affected the plants, and he says that yes, rarely that has happened and that some of the plants have died off, but for a long time it hasn't happened. And with a great big smile, he told us that it seems like the gods are on their side.
The most interesting thing that I learned was that the monk that first planted Longjing tea actually planted the tea plants at the Lingyan temple that we visited yesterday. And I hadn't grasped that originally. And to see that these kind of offshoots all started at that temple was kind of awe-inspiring.
After we learned probably everything there is to know about the Meija Wu Tea Farm, we were invited into a special tea presentation.
And a wonderful woman sat us down, and she had tea and some hot water and glasses ready for us to try the Longjing tea.
The first step of the presentation was she put some dry tea leaves in a special dish and reached out and slowly presented them to the table. And this is for appreciating the tea.
And then next she added a little water to each of the cups in this very fluid motion. And she twirled the cups to make sure they were nice and hot, and then she discarded that water.
The third step was placing the tea into the cups. She slowly took a tool and took a few tea leaves out of the container and into the glasses.
And next she added some water to the cups so that you then smell the leaves.
After she smelled each cup of tea, she then reached again for the hot water pot, and this time in an elaborate motion with 3 flicks of her wrist, she filled up each glass.
We learned that this ceremony is called phoenix bowing 3 times because of the way she poured the water for your first cup of tea 3 times in this bowing motion, which is a sign of respect, and you're bowing to your guests.
Then the tea was offered to us, and we got a chance to drink it. It smelled so rich and tasted very sweet, but I noticed that the water stayed clear, and I've never had a tea that's done that before. It was sort of amazing to have so much flavor in the clear water.
They drink Longjing out of glass. You know, a lot of times you see tea drunk in China out of china or porcelain, and they drink out of glass for a very specific reason. It's so you can also see the color of the leaves and the color of the liquor.
After we ate, we had the opportunity to buy some of the highest grade tea from the farm straight from the source. And that's important for 2 reasons. One, it ensures that the farmer is getting all of the money for all of their hard work and labor, and that's very important to me. Second is that it ensures that I'm getting the highest quality tea possible. There's no middleman to shuffle things around, maybe mix in lower grades and increase the price. So we got the best tea from that farm, hands down.
I just bought tea. We just bought some tea from the Meija Wu Tea Farm, direct from the source. In the United States, I normally have to go through a distributor, so it's really exciting that I got it from the farmers. And I got something that's a bit of a higher grade, their highest grade actually, and something a little bit lower, but still so delicious. And I'm really excited to share with everyone at home.
Yeah, the owners of the farm we visited on Meija Wu were kind enough to invite us back to their house for a fabulous home-cooked meal with over a dozen different dishes. It was delicious. And afterwards, we were lucky enough to buy some of the highest grade tea from the Meija Wu Tea Farm. I bought one for myself and one to share with friends.
decided to take an excursion outside of the city of Hangzhou, and we traveled about an hour and a half to an area south of the Yangtze River Delta, and it's an ancient water town called Wuzhen.
Wuzhen is a town that is about 1,300 years old, and it's full of canalways. The entire city is water.
And I learned that this is very typical of the architecture in this region. There's a lot of waterways and a lot of canals, and they've built these towns around the water.
These canals are actually used for transportation. You can see behind me, there's steps leading up to all the buildings, and people actually have goods delivered right to their doorstep by boat.
And just being here, you can see how authentic they have kept this town and this village.
If you look around us, you can see that every building is erected out of stone and wood. Everything is carefully designed to still look very old and remain that ancient aesthetic. Even air conditioner units have elaborate wooden boxes that are built around them to hide them.
It is very quaint, and it's filled with stone bridges and alleyways and really delicate wood carvings, and they've just kept it so immaculate and so pristine even after all this time.
We arrived here in the morning and the air was nice and cool. It had just finished raining, and we climbed onto this really old wooden boat to start exploring the areas of the canals.
And really the only way you can get around is through these boats.
And we're slowly paddled along by the driver. I was noticing how beautiful the paddle on the boat was, and we listened as that paddle slowly swished in the water, and listened to the sounds of the city around us, and watched people in their houses in the windows just enjoying their day, having tea, passed by restaurants where people were eating. As we rode along, we also noticed small nets hanging off of porches and out of windows into the water. We were told later that these nets actually are used to raise fish inside the nets, and whenever the people need to cook food, they just walk over to their window and pull the net up and pull out a fresh fish. I mean, literally fresh fish right outside your window. It doesn't get any better than that.
Well, we just finished an amazing trip in Hangzhou where we learned a lot about green tea. Next stop,
The Yunnan Province, where we're going to learn about pu'er tea. See you there.
bye! We finally arrived in Yunnan Province, which is in southern China and borders countries such as Vietnam and Burma and Thailand. So it's definitely a different feel from where we just came from in Hangzhou.
We finally arrived in Munghai County in Yunnan Province, and today we took a long drive up a twisted mountain road.
We travel up this really windy, bumpy dirt road up to the top of a mountain.
The way up was so steep at times that at some points it didn't even seem like a vehicle could climb the road until we got to the Hukai village. After an hour-long car ride up a twisting mountain road,
Suddenly the Boyert Tea Farm was right in front of us. You kind of realize, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. This is completely different from where we had just visited. And I realized that the trees I'm looking at are actually tea trees that are probably about 9 feet tall.
we were immediately greeted by girls from the Lahu minority, and they were dressed in beautiful, ornate dresses. They took us right into these trees here, which I've been told are 600 years old. And they climbed right up into the trees, so agile. And stood in the sun and picked the freshest leaves from right on top of the trees. We got to climb up after them, and they taught us how to pick the leaves. You can actually see that the leaves you want to pick are younger and they're waxy and shiny, and they shine in the summer sun. Incredible. Literally standing in the treetops picking tea. I had no idea that, first of all, these plants are so big, and second of all, that you actually have to climb them to get at the tea. You don't see a single ladder on this whole farm. These girls that were kind enough to show us how to pick the tea are completely agile. Some of them aren't even holding on to anything, just balancing on their feet and reaching out and pulling the limbs toward them and plucking off just the tips, just a few leaves and the sprout. And you can actually tell just by looking at them that it's this bright sort of waxy, shiny leaf. So it's easier to pick it out than we experienced on Jing, where the plants were so much smaller and there's more of a consistency between the leaves, and the sprouts you're picking are a lot smaller too. These are probably at least double in size than the leaves you pick on the Jing tea farm.
And I was so excited and thrilled when the woman invited me to climb the tree and start picking some tea leaves to make pu'er tea. And at first I was a little nervous because I'm not a tree climber, this is not what I do daily, but she showed me where to step and we kind of climbed up. Oh my goodness, this is so cool. The view was spectacular, and right then I realized I am one of the few people that will ever get to see this and experience this. I was like a kid in the candy store. I was just in my element, and I was just thrilled to be there, right there on top of the tree, looking over all the other tea trees and just being here. Wow, that was so much fun. I just got to climb a pu'er tree. I never in a million years thought I'd be able to actually climb one of these ancient trees and pick some pu'er leaves. It was so out of this world. I can't even explain to you how much fun and exciting, and it was more than I could ever dream. I really had no idea what what to expect, but we got to climb the trees, and I am thrilled beyond anything. I am so happy right now. Yay! I'm so excited.
Next, we were greeted by girls from the Bulong minority. They had beautifully crafted flower headdresses and beautiful blue dresses that went down to their feet. They climbed up into some trees and began to sing a local folk song that they sang while picking, and a man with a 4-string guitar stood below the trees playing with them. The whole time they were picking, they were just full of big, beautiful smiles, and we got so many great photographs of them against the sun in the background.
And I just, in that moment, I was just so happy to be here, and I realized how much work these people put in to making this tea, and it just must be ingrained in their traditions and their culture, and to realize that tea is so important to them. I couldn't really ever understand and grasp that back in the States, because there we're a bit removed from the home of tea, and here we are, kind of where tea began, and it is just so amazing. There aren't even really words to describe how I feel. I'm just so happy.
After we had picked a good amount of tea, we walked back toward the village where we were shown how the tea is processed here.
And this gentleman took these sacks of fresh tea leaves and just started shaking them out on the bamboo mats and fluffing them up. And we learned that he's actually kind of lying them out to start withering the leaves a little bit. And then right away he took bunches of tea leaves and put them in a basket, and there are these stone woks, or stone and metal pans right next to us, and they're hot. underneath they're actually feeding it bamboo, and there's a fire, a bamboo fire essentially, heating these huge bowls. And he throws this big bundle of tea, which is a lot bigger bundle than the tea leaves that they were using to make Longjing. And he just starts fluffing it up, and fluffing it and fluffing it. He's not flattening it and swirling it like Longjing. He's actually fluffing it so that it doesn't burn on these big woks.
He was wearing gloves, but quickly he showed us that he normally don't even wear gloves. They took the gloves off, and he was doing it with his bare hands. I couldn't believe it. We put some gloves on and tried it ourselves, and I could feel the heat through the gloves. We couldn't handle the tea as quickly as he did.
And I think it's because they need to kind of feel when it's the right sogginess or dampness and the right temperature for the leaves.
After he'd removed the tea from the hot basin, he laid it into a tray, and he rolled the tea around it on itself. This is called bruising, which helps to bring the flavor in the tea to the outside of the leaves, which is why we can taste it after it's brewed.
And then he takes them on to this raised bed that's in pure sunlight. And he puts the basket down, and he kind of starts separating it out on these baskets. And he says that now they're gonna air dry, and the sun is just gonna dry them for 3 to 4 hours. And he explained that he knew that the tea was at the perfect condition because when he bent the stem of the leaves, it didn't break, they actually bent. So he knew at that point, that was when the tea was in the perfect condition to start drying and make pu'er tea.
After lunch, a woman presented us pu'er tea in a different style that we'd seen at the Longjing tea farm.
This was my favorite part of the day because of course I love tea and I love pu'er, and this is going to be something that I've really never tried before back home in the United States. First, you take hot water and you actually heat this little cup, this porcelain cup, it's called a gaiwan, and you heat the cup, and she heats all the little cups that we'll be drinking out of and the pitcher as well. And this is to kind of make sure that they're warm for when we actually drink the tea. Oh, look at the tea. And next she adds some tea leaves, this huge handful of tea. I couldn't believe that she was gonna put this much in her cup and we were gonna drink this much tea. She puts it in, she adds some hot water, and she fills it all the way to the top and starts pouring over. And she puts the lid on. So she takes the first steeping and she kind of pours it in all of our glasses and also in the pitcher.
But the first steeping of the tea is simply called waking up the tea. It's not drank, it's just to release the first flavors of the tea, and then it's poured out. And then she rinses and dumps the water, and we get to smell the tea just from these rinsed cups. And you can kind of start to smell this little bit of earthiness and some of this greenness of the tea. So next, she actually fills the gaiwan again with water. And she actually pours the tea into the pitcher and pours us our first cup of tea. And I have to say, I didn't really know what to expect because this is very fresh pu'er. It was just plucked in April. It's very new. It is the top grade, she told us. Oh, it's nice. Very nice.
It's lighter than I imagined it to be. The pu'er here is, well, at least the first steeping is very mild, definitely toasty, but it's also more stringent. We usually have a very dark pu'er back home. This is very light and fresh.
Yeah, this pu'er is definitely more delicate. So it's a bit floral. It smells the way the leaves smell when they first came out of the firing. A lot less smoky and yeah, very, very nice, very easy to drink. Some pu'ers can be quite an acquired taste.
基本上也在个700，平均价在700左右。
After we had enjoyed tea, we came back to the tea farm and met with Mr. He, a renowned scholar of pu'er tea. One fact he explained to us was that this area was originally settled over 1,000 years ago by the Lahu minority.
And they have been making pu'er for over 1,000 years.
The tea here is harvested from February all the way to November, the earliest harvest being the highest quality of the tea. Another thing that we learned is that the trees in this area are barely tended to. There's no clipping back of the trees during the off-season. There's no fertilizing, there's no watering, and there's absolutely no pesticides. These trees are ancient and they produce the highest quality, the most natural and unpolluted of pu'er tea.
I asked the scholar really what makes pu'er so different from a green tea, from a black tea, and he explained that first and foremost, when you drink pu'er from these ancient trees, from these bigger leaves, you actually are having a lot more health benefits than green tea. And the States kind of always hear about green tea, but pu'er actually, they believe, has more health benefits, most notably for lowering your cholesterol. It was interesting to note that actually the tea bushes of the Longjing tea and all the pu'er trees here are actually the same plant. They're all Camellia sinensis, but each of these different regions have different varieties of this one plant. I own a tea shop where I do sell some pu'er, and I kind of realized here it's intense labor to make this tea. So when people back home kind of complain a little bit about how expensive this tea is, I wish that they could be in my shoes right now to see how hard these people work and how much love and dedication they have put into this tea. I also just love that it's not just taste. You drink with your eyes and you drink with your nose, and of course you taste the tea, and you also feel, I mean, there's cicadas and they're humming and buzzing around us, and it's just so peaceful and completely unlike any other place I've been to in my life. Today we are in Sichuanbana to experience some of the local flavor in Yunnan Province.
We headed down to the Wild Elephant Valley, and we were greeted by a group from the Wa minority. They put on a special tribal drum dance for us. It was amazing.
I've been a dancer my whole life, and seeing this was very different from kind of what we see in the US or really anywhere else. It was very powerful. It was very animalistic. It almost looked like the women were using their hair as like ears. The men had these big bamboo sticks, almost like weapons, and they were low to the ground and just very primitive. Later in the afternoon, we drove a little further into the wilderness, and
we headed over to see some wild elephants.
This area of China is home to the only wild Chinese elephants in the country. And we were able to see some of the tamer ones, some of the ones that they have trained.
A group of 4 elephants with a trainer came through the water, just eating their lunch. They were just eating as much as they could. They just noshing away, picking up these really long grasses that grow along the water. They seem to enjoy those the most.
And splashing themselves in water. It's really hot, so I think they were cooling themselves off.
They'd even pick up some mud and spray mud out over themselves to try to stay cool, and it was just such a sight. They were just so magnificent. Something new I learned about these elephants is that they only sleep about 2 hours a day. The rest of their day they spend eating.
I know elephants eat plants, so it was really fascinating to find out that they eat over 45 pounds of food a day.
We were lucky enough to have the trainer come over and let us climb onto the back of one of the elephants with him.
I got to ride an elephant, which is really exciting. I was so thrilled. Nothing on it, I'm not prepared, I don't have a helmet.
Then we carefully climbed onto the back of it, holding onto the trainer as the elephant stood back up and walked through the muddy banks.
And it was kind of scary, though thrilling at the same time, because of course the riverbed is not flat, it's not a road. So we were kind of going low and up and like rummaging around, and I just kind of like let my body move with the movement.
After we'd rode around a little while, we came back up to this bank right behind us, and the elephant kneeled down again really slowly and let us off. We stood there and thanked it.
It was such a sweet creature and so gentle for its size. Such a huge elephant, and it's just so calm and accommodating. And so I was able to stroke her nose, and I was trying to feed her some grass, but they said she was full.
After that, the trainer rode the elephant back up to its wild habitat where it lives.
Today is our last and final day visiting the tea lands of China, and we were very fortunate to visit Banpo Laojai village, which is just up this very kind of rural mountainside. And the translation actually means mid-mountain old village.
We drove way up into the fog and the clouds, high on top of the mountains, and I hope you can just see behind me how ethereal and beautiful and majestic these woods are. I've never experienced forests like this at all. Not even the California redwoods can compare to what we feel here right now. It's just amazing and beautiful. I can't even describe it. We began our hike by entering the village, and we rounded a corner and we were greeted by the minority, the Hani minority here. They stood on both sides of the path and sang a very festive, welcoming song for visitors from afar. They clapped as they sang.
And they were dressed in their traditional garments, which were very different from some of the other ones we saw. They had a lot of feathers and these silver discs on their dress that almost kind of reminded me of Native Americans, because it was, you know, with the feathers and the pom-poms and the discs that looked like shells. It was quite interesting to see some of the parallels of Native Americans in the US and some of the villagers and the ethnic minorities here. Right after they greeted us with this beautiful song, they actually took us up a muddy path up the mountain.
As we walked, the views just spread out ahead of us, and the fog got thicker and thicker, the mists just moving through the trees.
I'm surrounded by these old pu'er trees, and they're hidden in the mists, and there's bigger trees that are really ancient, and it was just so magical and so mystical that I started to get very emotional and overwhelmed, because it was very much like we are kind of seeing a secret world, like a little hidden gem in Yunnan Province, something that I don't think a lot of outsiders ever get to see or experience.
I walked through and I noticed that the buds on the trees here are like a bright, almost a neon green color, right on tops of the trees.
Today we learned that pu'er trees in the forest grow at a much slower rate than the other trees here.
Right behind us is a great example of this. Here's a pu'er tree that existed before the tree behind it, which is a massive, over 100-foot tall, mature tree. We walked for nearly an hour up the winding path, enjoying the beautiful scenery around us until we finally reached a 900-year-old pu'er tree, the most ancient tree in this forest. It's just breathtaking.
The trunk of the tree is not as tall as other trees around it.
It grows up just about 8 or 10 feet or so, and then straight out, very wide, almost like a peach tree at home, very gnarly and wild. And there are shoots shooting straight up out of the top of the plant that are about 30 feet tall.
And just as we were kind of admiring and kind of revering this old tree,
we watched the Hani minority men and women that had hiked up here with us climb up into the trees on these steep slopes around us. And they climbed up to the tops of the trees and began to pick off those neon green buds of the teas and placing them in large baskets on their hip. And they sang a very, very beautiful local folk song that they sing while picking teas.
And it was so foggy that all you could hear were their voices. I couldn't even see them in the trees. They were like ghosts. It was just so powerful and so mystical.
It actually reminded me of hearing the tribal songs of Seneca and Iroquois Indian on reservations when I grew up as a child in upstate New York. Just peaceful and tranquil and flowing.
Just after they finished singing and plucked some tea from these beautiful hidden trees in the mist, we actually were able to try some of the tea made from the ancient tree here.
We were standing in front of an ancient 900-year-old pu'er tree.
And it's an honor and a privilege to be able to try some of the tea made from this 900-year-old tree. Oh, it's so good. The pu'er here from this ancient tree is a completely different taste from the one that we tried at Hökai. It has almost a fruity note to it, but it's definitely really toasty and earthy and has a bit more astringency. It is so good.
The flavors are much more complex. When you first sip it, it's got that initial flavor that we tasted, and as it sits in your mouth, you can taste just all these different flavors come out in the tea, and you can really taste the age.
I'm getting very overwhelmed being here. You know, this is getting very emotional too, because for so long, people would always tell me, you can't have a tea shop, you can't, how can you make a living selling tea? And it's so a counterculture, and for the first time I feel like maybe I'm doing the right thing. Sorry. Just being here, maybe I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do, and maybe I am supposed to provide a wonderful experience to people and something different, and somehow, some way, share this with them and share this calmness and just how tea is not just something that you just pick up and drink. There's just so much more meaning, and I can't even explain my emotions. All I can do is just feel and hope that maybe when I have time back home or in a few moments, I can just kind of write everything down. It's just so, we're in the mists. It's not even real. It's so unreal. It's unreal to be here. The drinking tea from a plant that's 900 years old. And I'm just so honored and I'm so privileged and I'm so thankful to actually be here. I can't really fully express with words. I'm so happy that we caught a lot of this on film because it is just so powerful. And this is something that the people here in China have been perfecting and been crafting for thousands of years. And to be able to witness just a glimpse of some of the daily things that they do and some of the daily tasks in making tea has been such an honor and such a privilege. I really can't think of a better ending to such an enlightening experience here in China.
I can't tell you how happy it makes me to be in this beautiful place right now. Look behind us. It just doesn't get any better than this. I really enjoy the outdoors and I love to hike at home. I take every opportunity I can to enjoy a nice hike, and I couldn't think of a better way to end this amazing trip than to be able to hike nearly an hour up into these mountains and enjoy this ancient tea. It's just been the best day of this trip so far, and I'm so happy right now.
Personally, from this trip, I have learned to really appreciate the Chinese culture in all its aspects. Professionally, I am walking away with a boosted confidence as a tea shop owner in the United States. I have so much more knowledge and so much more experience to bring back and share in my shop.
As a person who works in coffee, I've really gained a much greater understanding of Chinese tea and just a much greater sense of appreciation for the tea itself. I hope to bring back some of the preparation methods I've learned and teach my staff, and I also hope to bring some of the higher quality teas into my shop to offer to my customers.
The visit to the tea lands of China could not have ended more perfectly than where it all began. Next to this ancient tea tree, the oldest in this village, with the cicadas singing our praises.